Keep it alive through these lines I write. I keep it live cause I thrive. I might just blow your mind tonight. I'm so hyped, but it's no hype. From this height, it's direct hits on sight. I'm your type, lend me your ears to show you that there's something in me. I'm not giving up, I'm standing right here, holding these days hostage. And I'll make this my year. We turning fear into love, and the love's in the air. I love doing this cause nothing compares. Nothing can share that same type of feeling when you feeling them flares. They can't catch it, it's havoc. I rip to a tear, switch the scenario. My stereos, I leave them impaired. Variables start to change and they're all in my range. I just gotta grab it, it's all mathematics. Every step is drastic, I make it fantastic. I'm trying to take your breath away. Asthmatic. This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow, blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo, stereo. This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow, blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo, stereo. Yeah, just nod your head with it. So explicit and vivid. Every image is intricate, intimate. I put my all into it. No scrimmage and no rules. I'm a pro tool. Hear my heartbeat beat into the vocals. I'm so loco, lost my mind, oh no. It's ponderoso, dope, so no overdose, cause it's dope, yo. Man, this is house grown, mixed with some milestones. So I let the style flow down like the Dow Jones. Bringing it with some foul tones, letting the crowd know we getting loud, so it's eardrum rudiments. Yeah, we bring it rude again. Move, little hooligan. Music for tuning in, full time to the 10. I'm on my clock like I told you. I'm doing this for dreams we pursuing.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Anti-Media Radio Show. Once again with your host Nick Bernabe here on ucy.tv and the antimedia.org/radio. Really happy to be back alive and well on this Wednesday, January 10th, 2018. In the studio tonight. What's up, DB?
What's going on, Nick?
Chilling, man.
Glad to be back home.
Glad you're here.
Always gonna be my home, but 2-year hiatus.
Glad you're here, dude, and happy to be, having you back in studio. It's been too long. I remember we used to do almost every show in studio, and get pretty reckless in here at times. But always a good time and some very, very interesting discussions. I've been wanting to go back and listen to some of our old shows from like 4 years ago. I remember the first time I did a show and how nervous I was, and now it's kind of just, one of these things where I do these shows and it makes me feel good because it feels good to get out, to be able to talk about the stuff that's, plaguing all of us and the stuff that, the interesting solutions that we've been talking about recently. And, just really trying to crack through all this propaganda and all this crazy, insane stuff going on. And, of course, it's just accelerated so much now with Trump, and the news cycle is just batshit insane. And, unfortunately, it's been kind of, it's been misdirected where now we're talking about a bunch of superficial nonsense with Trump on Twitter, and we're not talking enough, or not us, but, the important topics aren't being talked about enough. And so, we try to really get that, tackle that kind of stuff on the show. But anyway, DV's not the only one reuniting with us tonight. We've also got Manny Aguilar in the house. What's up, Manny?
Well, I'm doing pretty well. Nice drive, being up there in L.A. A lot of the fires, helping the brothers and sisters, as much as possible. And it's a very, very sad thing to have seen that people lost their homes and lost their stuff. And, of course, there's been fires in every county in California between Santa Barbara County and down here in San Diego County. But other than that, it's kind of nice to be here with my Rasta brother, Nick, and my vanilla brother, DV, and the Mocha sister, Lily.
So, I don't have anything really planned tonight. We're not going to do too much in the news, although we can touch on some new stuff if you guys want to. The first thing is that, man, the weather has been just crazy, right? Just this week, we got hit here in Southern California with this freak storm. I mean, it was almost like, I looked outside and it was almost like hurricane strength wind. I've never been in a hurricane, but some of the mountains nearby, we recorded like 75-mile-an-hour winds, and so it was pretty crazy. And it was like a storm that came down from like the Gulf of Alaska, but I guess it picked up some moisture from the subtropics and just slammed Southern California. And of course, we talked about all those wildfires that were up in LA and up in Ventura and stuff. And as if those weren't bad enough, now these rains came along and caused a bunch of flooding and a bunch of mudslides and stuff. And now there's the death tolls up to like 17 dead in Southern California from this storm. And then of course last week there was this huge, I don't know what to call it. They called it a bomb cyclone that hit the East Coast, and it was almost like a winter hurricane. And that was another freak storm, and that caused a fair amount of suffering, a lot of suffering actually, and a bunch of people died as well, and cold related injuries and car accidents and that kind of thing. And then we also covered today on the anti-media, there's this crazy heat wave down in Australia, and bats are literally just dropping out of the sky dead. The scientists or the people who were trying to rescue these bats basically said they were boiled alive while they were in the air. And so we're dealing with some really extreme shit with weather. And so, it's really extreme. And so this is something I think that we're going to be seeing a lot of this year. And then, of course, there was that big earthquake in the Caribbean that, fortunately there wasn't very much damage and there wasn't a tsunami. But, something that we covered recently was that the Earth has a slight slowdown in its rotation for some reason. I think it may date back to that big earthquake in Chile a couple years ago. Do you guys remember that it kind of like slowed the rotation of the Earth down a little bit?
I remember.
Well, they just came out with a study that said, there's a good chance that because of the slowing rotation, there's actually going to be an increase in major earthquakes. And so that may be what we're starting to see with what happened in the Caribbean. And so we're dealing with a bunch of natural disasters going on all around the world, to add on to the fact that we got all this crazy political nonsense going on as well, and so this is something that I guess isn't really political, but it's something that we need to be aware of. And we've been talking about this kind of stuff for a pretty long time. I mean, I think since we began this show, me and DB have been talking about preparing and being ready for stuff like this when it happens, to have backup supplies and have backup resources that you could trade and all that kind of stuff. I think now is a time to look back and think about that kind of stuff, because look, we're going to be dealing with extreme climate, whether we want to attribute it to climate change or whether we want to attribute it to natural cycle of the Earth, or I personally think that it's a natural cycle that mankind is affecting, that is making it worse, making it more extreme, more rapid. We need to be ready for this stuff, and we can't count on politicians to be bailing us out, to save us. I mean, look at Puerto Rico. Why isn't anybody talking about Puerto Rico anymore? But dude, last time I checked, there was a huge percentage of the population down there still without power.
A news story just came out that they sent down some officials and found a warehouse full of electrical equipment that the local leadership was keeping from the people and blackmailing them to get the last of what they had to put the power back up.
Crazy, dude. Crazy. So the politicians are actually getting in the way, right? And so we've had some friends that were down there doing some aid work down in Puerto Rico and in the Caribbean. And it's not like there was a shortage of people willing to donate and send supplies and relief over there. The government, and FEMA included, was actually getting in the way. So not only can we not count on these guys to bail us out in the case of a natural disaster, and I can only imagine what would happen here in Southern California in the case of a tsunami or something like that, something major, because that's really the most major thing that could happen to us here. We get the wildfires and stuff like that. We get the earthquakes, but a tsunami would be just devastating, because if it was big enough, it could really impact San Diego, Orange County, and Los Angeles County, and millions and millions of people, tens of millions of people could be affected by that. I could only imagine the mayhem that would happen. And from what we've been seeing,
Coronado just sinking.
Coronado like completely wiped clean, right?
Yeah.
what we've been seeing is that the government actually makes the matters worse when they try to step in because there's a bunch of bureaucracy, a bunch of red tape. So that's just something to keep in mind as this weather stuff takes off. I think 2018, we saw at the end of last year those hurricanes that came up and they really flooded out Houston and the hurricane wiped out Puerto Rico and it really decimated the Caribbean and stuff. I think this year we're going to see a lot more of that stuff because it looks like whether it's just, like I said, if it's just a natural cycle or whatever, the weather is off right now. It's extreme. Like the storm that we just had yesterday, the last few days here in San Diego and Southern California, set records. I mean, you don't see 75-mile-an-hour winds in San Diego. You just don't. And it set rainfall records. We had like 3 inches come down in the northern part of San Diego. And it also set warm temperature records. The temperature is actually warmer than normal. So we had this weird, crazy winter storm, but it brought hot, warm temperatures. So we set record warm temperatures for the month of January. We set record rainfall for the month of January, and we set record wind velocity. So at the same time, you got this stuff going on the East Coast. You got the heat wave going on in the Southern Hemisphere. You got some really extreme shit. This is going to be a big, issue this year. And so it's still early. It's January. There's enough time to start getting ready. This hurricane season coming up at the end of next year is going to be really nasty. I can only imagine. So get ready now. That's all I can say.
And by saying that and being prepared too, I like to let people know that they should prepare. If you have your animals, you got to prepare for that because a lot of the horses were lost in the fire here in San Diego County. A lot of them got saved and taken to Del Mar, but a lot of them died because there wasn't enough trailers to transport them and stuff like that. So people have to think about that and all that, and that's very important, And so, and I'm glad that you guys here in San Diego County had the climate march on Sunday and all that, Also want to say a shout out, to anybody that might know the family of that firefighter that died in the fire in Escondido. That was a tragedy. So
Corey Iverson. Yeah, I knew people that knew him. So,
okay.
Yeah, the way he inhaled too much smoke and fell down an embankment. So that was just kind of a fluke accident in a way. But yeah, I mean, they're literally using prisoners right now to fight the fires, and they've exhausted all of them. There's nobody left from prisons to pull out. And it's like they've got to come. I mean, when Jerry Brown says it's the new normal, you got to come up with like an actual professional firefighting troop. You can't have prisoners, dude.
Yeah, they're basically just grabbing these dudes more or less almost as indentured servants or whatever. They're giving them like $1 a day or something, and they're putting them out there, putting their lives on the line, fighting fires. And, they're good enough to fight our fires, but they're also not good enough to have freedom, and they're not good. They're good enough to, not good enough to not be behind bars for drug charges and shit. So it's just, it's ridiculous, man. So I guess we'll just go around and see what you guys want to talk about. I know Manny wanted to talk about some stuff. Let's hit Manny first.
Okay.
And let's talk about what you want to talk about. Then we'll go to DB.
Well, I just want to talk about the SOA. A lot of people don't know what the SOA is all about, and it's the School of the Americas, where all these tyrants and countries that rule the countries are trained. We trained them in Fort Benning, Georgia, and we're trying to close down the SOA school in Fort Benning, Georgia, because they basically, we train them here, and then they become dictators, and then we want to push them out. But the United States is the one that creates all these problems and stuff like that. And the SOA is the School of Americas, but it's AKA also known as the School of the Assassins and stuff like that. Well, we train these people, and then we let them rule, in other countries and stuff like that. And so the blood's in our hands and stuff like that. So I was down there in Nogales, Arizona, and also Nogales, Mexico, and it was very moving to see 10,500 people on both sides of the border, really talking about the different problems. We were talking about, and we went to Eloy, which is the most inhumane detention center ICE has in Eloy, Arizona, and we were down there protesting and doing a vigil, and it was very moving for me. The thing that got very emotional for me in Arizona was when we were reading the names of the Jane Does and the people with names and stuff like that dying in the desert, and we say presente and stuff. I think the story that took me back more than any other story was when a woman and her 1 year and a half child died in the desert because of lack of water and stuff like that. And that's because of Operation Streamline, and stuff. ICE has made it so complicated for people, and we're killing people. We're separating people. We're getting rid of DACA, and because this pendejo, he wants a wall up there, so that he can be proud of having the wall, And the wall's not going to keep anybody that's desperate to come to this country, Cartel ain't worried about the wall. They said they'll drill more tunnels, they'll come underneath.
Cartel, shit, they see that wall as a business opportunity, make more money for them, right?
Yeah, drive the prices up.
Yeah, exactly. Drive the price up.
Exactly.
And not only that, but the wall, eventually, as me and DB have talked about plenty of times, I'm sure eventually in the next 10, 15 years it'll be used to start keeping people in.
Yeah.
Not letting people leave when the economy starts, when China takes the torch and the economy, the dollar has its day of reckoning, and then all of a sudden everyone's like, holy shit, we need to get out of here, shit's getting ugly. All of a sudden that wall isn't such a good idea anymore because it's holding you in and you're getting trapped in.
Exactly. And talking about the wall, Nick, I have to mention that there's one thing that we're working on right now, and it happens to be here in San Diego County in Imperial Beach. We're trying to create and turn that park into Friendship Park again, what it was before, And it's very important because in Nogales, you're able to hug and shake hands with people over there. Down here, you can barely put your pinky. Just the tip of your pinky is the only thing you can say hi to people and stuff like that. It's a very inhumane wall. I call it Berlin because it's almost like being in Berlin, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And we need to turn it into Friendship Park again and stuff like that. Also, I'd like to say I was very happy to know that a veteran finally made it to the United States. I think Hector's going to be the next veteran to make it to the United States after all these years of exile in Mexico. And one of our dreamer moms that finally made it, at least, she passed away a year after she made it, but at least she passed away with her family instead of passing away by herself, very lonely in Tijuana, Mexico, and stuff like that. So I just want to make those comments, and also shout out to our workers out there that are really fighting for their rights again, and boycott Driscoll, the San Quintin people, stuff like that.
Driscoll, the pickers,
fruit company.
Yeah, we haven't been buying them because when we heard about how they don't even provide bathrooms for their pickers, which means that you could get sick eating their produce because people don't have bathrooms.
Yep.
So.
All right. So a couple things to ask you about, Manny. Speaking about Arizona, Joe Arpaio, the toughest or the most racist sheriff in America, depending on which side of the aisle or which way you want to look at it. He's announced that he's going to be running for the Senate, the U.S. Senate for Arizona. What do you think? What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's really bad for us because it was already bad enough that he was, well,
he was convicted, right?
Yeah,
he was convicted of basically more or less had to do with racial profiling, right?
Exactly.
And he was convicted of that, and then Trump pardoned him.
Exactly. And what to me, I'm glad you asked that question because first he's enforcing his own laws, making up his own laws to enforce them. Now being in the Senate, he's going to be able to write the laws, and we might have a problem again in profiling, the same thing that happened with that governor in Arizona, started doing all this laws, and not every law passed, and so I think he's going to become more dangerous if he wins. Now, I'm hoping he won't win. I think there's a big possibility he won't make it, because there's a lot of people that are seeing what he really is all about and stuff like that, And so we'll see what happens. And I'll never forget Arpaio because he pointed me out. He basically embarrassed me in front of everybody. He pointed me out in front of everybody, all my activist friends, and he told me to go back to my country. So I'll never forget him for sure,
Yeah, and the guy was not only was he a racist piece of shit, but he also bragged about, basically operating a concentration camp in Arizona, which was the prison that he set up and all that.
And he humiliated everybody by wearing pink.
Yeah, And then apparently he made someone burn their dog or watch them burn their dog alive. The guy's a total fucking psychopath. Like he's not even, I wouldn't even call him a sociopath because I don't think he's that smart. He's literally a psychopath. And here's the sad part, dude. I mean, no one's accused him of like sexual misconduct yet or anything. But at this point, that's almost like a prerequisite to be in the Senate. You got to be racist. I mean, if you're running as a Republican, you need to be a racist sex offender, and then you're like, all right, you're qualified, basically. I mean, if that's the, looking at what just happened in Alabama with Roy Moore, and dude, the guy lost by like less than a percentage point. Roy Moore was accused of, sexually assaulting 14-year-old girls, and was just openly, just completely racist and insane. And the guy lost by 1 percentage point. Joe Arpaio, a lot more calculating, I think, than Roy Moore. Now, don't get me wrong. I think these guys are both idiots. But I think Joe Arpaio actually does have a chance of winning and becoming a senator in Arizona. As crazy as it sounds, as ridiculous as it sounds, I know a lot of people, Republicans, and a lot of people who are libertarians and former libertarians that have find sympathy in this guy for whatever reason. And I think because he was such an anti-Obama guy, basically, and so people are like, oh, well, he hated Obama, so he must be good or whatever. That's not, I mean, of course, Obama was far from good or great or anything. We criticize him on a regular basis on this show. But just because you don't like Obama doesn't mean you're a good person or that you're a good human being or that you know what you're talking about or that you're doing things that are going to advance the cause of freedom. You can hate Hillary Clinton and Obama, and you can still be an idiot. That's just, there's no other way to put it. You can hate them and still be an idiot. Just because you understand that half of the political spectrum is corrupt and screwing people doesn't make you very smart, especially if you think that Trump is like doing something good or that the Republicans are like the answer to the problem of Democrats. Then you really don't know what the fuck you're talking about. So, there's that. And then, Manny, one more question for you, dude. Bunch of stuff going on with immigration. First of all, the big story today was that ICE went and raided like 100 different 7-Eleven locations throughout the country, presumably searching, looking for labor violations and looking for immigrants, and also looking to punish the business owners who are hiring immigrants. Now, you got to think, if you're a business owner, why would you hire an immigrant if you still got to pay the same wages, and if it's more complicated to hire an immigrant, especially one that's undocumented? Why would you hire an immigrant? Well, there's a good, simple answer. Because they need the workers. There's people that aren't willing to work jobs. Sometimes an immigrant who's, looking to get their foot in the door will work a job that U.S. citizens wouldn't want to work, and so there's part of the reason why someone who owns a 7-Eleven is going to hire an immigrant, because they can't find anyone else to work. And if no one wants to work, they have to hire somebody. And if an immigrant applies, well, there you go. There's your worker. And so, there's that going on. And then you got the other news with, I believe it was Nicaragua, right? And how they're rescinding basically the protections that all these refugees had. Now, I don't remember this incident, but apparently there was like a big earthquake down there a long time ago, 20 years ago or something, and it created a huge refugee crisis, and it was kind of like what happened in Haiti, right? And a bunch of people were looking for sanctuary, and the U.S. allowed a certain amount of people to come up, and that was 20 years ago. A lot of these people, of course, started families, have careers, started businesses, have a life, have a house, have all this stuff planted here in the United States. And now Trump is saying, all right, you guys, you may get kicked out. So between those two things, dude, what are your thoughts on all this stuff?
Well, it's bad when that thing happens and stuff like that. My problem with ICE right now is that to get people out, instead of saying we're ICE and stuff like that, they're saying they're police. They're not police. People in LA, if you're police, you're police. If you're ICE, you're ICE. But they it's an entrapment of what they're doing. Motel 6, I don't know if you know, Nick and DV, Motel 6 got caught, giving out names of who was staying in their hotel.
Yeah, snitching,
basically, and stuff like that. So we need to protect the immigrant at a different level, because I went through that where the employer hired us, and then all of a sudden comes payday 2 weeks later, during payday, immigration just happened to, the employer says, oh, immigration just happened to, be here. No, they didn't. They called them themselves so they wouldn't have to pay anybody. And we lost a lot of wages back in the day and stuff like that. And I think that's what's going to be happening, to a lot of employers and stuff like that, And so we have to we have to fight the system, And the cops. I'll tell you one thing right now that I have a problem with. A cop's either a cop or he's an immigration officer. He can't be both. It's unconstitutional. You know what I mean? You're either working for the feds or you're working at the local level. And stuff like that. But I will tell you one thing that I need to tell people out there that are filing for immigration status is there's a lot of crooked attorneys out there. So just beware of that, And then there's wannabe attorneys and they're paralegals. They don't know nothing about what they're doing, And not to offend any paralegal, but a paralegal is a paralegal and an attorney is an attorney and stuff like that,
Yeah. And so, this immigration thing, like I said, it's a war on businesses. It's a war on the economy, for second of all. All the people who are here, many of which I would more likely consider refugees rather than just simple migrant workers. I think they're both. People are, they're leaving from a situation where their lives are in danger, especially down in Central America, Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, places in Mexico where the drug war is horrible. They're leaving there, fleeing for their lives, and they're coming looking for a better opportunity, looking for jobs, looking to make some money. And so it's a war on those people. And the other thing that isn't talked about enough is that the crackdown on immigration is also a drastic increase on policing powers. I mean, we're talking about increasing the surveillance against everybody in the U.S. by a lot. I mean, I don't know if you guys have been seeing. I was trying to pull up the link right now, but it's a little too old to pull up in this recent news search that I did here. But they're searching people's electronics, U.S. citizens, people from all over the world. They're searching your electronics as you come in the country. They're getting your password. They're opening up your phone. They're checking your social media. Oh, did this person ever say anything bad about Trump?
Yeah.
Because if they did, maybe we won't want to let them in the country. Or maybe a person like myself who criticizes this government, I go out of the country, I try to come back in, and then I run into problems. It's a possibility. And with Trump, they're increasing all of these powers. They're giving more authority to ICE. They're giving more money to ICE. They're wanting to build up this wall, increasing surveillance, creating databases. I mean, they're going. Why did they single out 7-Elevens today? I mean, did they say, well, there's a bunch of Indian dudes that own 7-Elevens, so we're just going to assume that they're hiring illegal South Asian workers, basically. And so they go in and they basically ethnically targeting businesses at this point. I mean, this is very police state shit. This is police state shit.
They chose 7-Eleven because if you really research it, you'll notice that it's minority Pakistan owned, and Pakistan just dropped $1. So anything that's Pakistan business in the U.S. is going to get destroyed now. Just piece by piece.
I didn't know that. I didn't know Pakistan was a player in 7-Eleven.
Well, it's not only that. Up in Minnesota now, the owner of Mall of America is Iranian. So they're starting to pull him apart now and pull that mall apart. And that's what's going to happen. It's the same thing was going on. It's a different player now. Like, I don't think people understand that we're living inside of a coup right now. And it's a military coup and it's soft. Yeah. And it's going to become hard. And when it becomes hard, if you're in the wrong spot, it's not going to be happy time. I mean, this is the area. When you told me you're thinking about leaving, I would be too. I honestly would. If I wasn't up in Minnesota, I'd be thinking about bouncing.
Yeah, well, you got the cold to protect you.
Well, it's not even that. It's a different world. It's a different America. I'm telling you right now, it's a different America up there. There's very little we have in common from a way that it runs, except for the corporations that sell shit. That's the only thing we share. We didn't even have alcohol sales on Sunday until this year. So everything's different.
Yeah, you can't even buy alcohol on Sunday.
Well, it's for the Super Bowl. So that's what I'm trying to say. It's like big business pushes change, but it's middle America. It's not a coast, and it's not a major port. But it's a major city, but it's still the Midwest. But it's partly Canada, because everybody up there is like, you know, they're like live and let live. They don't care what you do. They're like super liberal, but then they're super conservative with financials. So when like the government tries to spend money on stuff, people are like, hell no, you raise my taxes. I don't want that program. That doesn't help me. So, you know, it's just a way different place up there. But everything we're seeing in the U.S., everything, including DACA and the wall, is all geopolitical. It all has to do with the fact that dollars are going to die a very, very violent death. And they just want to boot as many people out as they can, because imagine trying to control the country with 1 million, billion, trillion people in here. As many people as they can boot out is the easier to control the rest of us.
Oh, that's true.
You bring up an interesting point with Pakistan. This is a story we covered several times already on the anti-media. This is a really, really big story because people don't maybe people do, but a lot of people don't realize how big of a player Pakistan is. I mean, it sits right between Afghanistan and India and China. And I think it also borders Iran. No, it borders another big Middle Eastern country. It might be Iran. And so Pakistan is huge, right? And of course, Trump came out on Twitter, like on New Year's Day, I think it was, and he was talking shit about Pakistan. Of course, there was other stuff happening in the background. Now, just I think it was a week or two prior to that, the Trump administration was actually praising Pakistan because obviously they were trying to make some kind of agreement ahead of time, right?
Yeah.
The agreement must have fallen through in the following weeks. This happened a couple weeks before the New Year.
Yeah.
And then on New Year Day, Trump's out on Twitter talking shit about Pakistan. And then now a bunch of stuff has come out. Look, in the following days, Pakistan announced that we're going to start shifting from dealing in U.S. dollars to dealing with China with the yuan. China, I'm sure, is probably their biggest economic partner at this point. And then just 2 days ago, we covered on the anti-media that Pakistan, a military official, said that we no longer consider the U.S. an ally. Now, today on the anti-media, a guest post from Zero Hedge, Pakistan suspends military intelligence cooperation with the United States. So what we're seeing here, and we talked about this on the show actually, a couple weeks ago. And so I'm glad that we were ahead of this story because we were ahead of this thing before anyone else was even talking about it, because we have guys like Darius and James keeping a close eye on this stuff and writing about it for us.
They had an internet blackout for 4 days, and a lot of people don't know that. They actually had a coup attempt. And this is the interwoven web of the world. The CIA is basically installed in Pakistan, and the military, because they're taking over now away from the CIA, and the central banks wanted to dislodge Pakistan's current regime, and they failed. So they lost. Basically, they're being punished. And what people should understand of what's going on now in the U.S. It is a civil war. It's just not between the people. It's between the intelligence apparatus and the military. And so Pakistan was a proxy battleground. Like, they wanted to try to overthrow the CIA installed regime, and they couldn't. And that's the ISL. So I know you're hip to exactly what they were and how implicit they were in supposedly shielding Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
So these guys are number one hated by the military in the U.S. because of that. So there you go.
Yeah. So it's very, very complicated thing. Now, of course, China is basically, and this has to do with the other stuff we were just talking about, the immigration, the wall, and all this police state shit going on. It's become very evident, and we've been, again, something we've been talking about, because we try to talk about these bigger trends. And yes, we're cracking beers and we're smoking weed because, you know what, it's California and we do that kind of shit out here and no one can say anything about it. We may be stupid as hell on gun rights and stupid as hell on taxes and a bunch of other shit, but at least we know what's up with weed. Except now they're trying to tax it and give people DUIs for driving.
At least they made it so
at least it's not a criminal thing.
Now that we're talking about military, I want to say one thing that's happening right now in Mexico, which is really sad. They've been approved, to get a lot of weapons from the United States, and that scares me.
Well, I think there's a merger on the way. You remember when they were talking about the North American Union, where Canada, the U.S., and Mexico would merge into a super economic state? I don't think Canada's on board anymore. but I'm pretty sure Mexico is ready to do that.
That's
and
what's happening. Huh?
I think the wall is actually going to create this, like, what's the thing with the twin plants, the maquiladores, or the system where there's twin? They're going to make a border in between where there's no constitution of Mexican or the U.S. for the oligarchs.
Yeah.
No man's already a neutral section anyway. You know that, right?
So they're going to make two walls and make a little enclosed super border Vegas all the way from ocean to ocean.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Just like the airport now. You know how you can go across the bridge?
Oh,
now,
yeah.
They already opened that.
I use that thing too. It saves a lot of time.
Yeah.
Carlos Slim.
So
exactly.
Here's the thing. Look, America has existed more or less. Look, if you ask people, the general public, the general person out there who isn't involved in knowing about this kind of stuff very much, and you say, hey, what's the biggest empire in the world? And they'll say, Russia? I don't know. Is there an empire? Because people don't realize the United States is an empire, but it's a little different of an empire than, of course, the British and the empires before it. The U.S. has been somewhat of of course, we send our military in to do the hard work, but then we pull most of them out and we send in the businesses and the corporate empire. The economic empire is what the United States is, the model that they took from the British and they improved on it. And they said, you know what, we're not going to put standing armies. We're not going to just, occupy land with vast armies and stuff like that. We're going to just go in, do a quick job, knock the government out, replace it with a puppet government, and then do business there. Kind of like what they did with Iran. Perfect example of what they tried to do with Iran, back when they put the Shah in power and all that kind of stuff. That is the American empire. That's how they hope to operate. And then for the contractors to keep making their money, they have a small presence and they do, the drone strikes and the air strikes and the jets.
But it's important to make the distinction between intelligence and military, because when you think about the American empire, we've been controlled basically purely by the CIA since they killed JFK. So they've been pulling all the strings, and the coup of installing Trump was because the military is tired of being thrown against the entire world for the gain of a few. And I know people are like, oh, that actually sounds ideal. In the end, maybe it will be, but you can understand what's going to happen when they come out in the open and go, hey, guess what? We're going to arrest him and him and him and throw all them in
arresting
jail.
The opposition, crushing free speech,
everything,
jailing dissident, deporting a shitload of people.
Yep.
It's already going on.
And then the dollar dies, and then guess what? You have a wall on the southern border. Yeah. Where are you going?
I'm being investigated as a president. Now get this guy out of office.
Oh yeah.
So all right. On that point, the U.S. has been governments are very inefficient. Governments are bureaucratic. Governments aren't smart. They make bad decisions all the time. I mean, what the U.S. did with all the resources that we spent in Afghanistan and Iraq after 9/11, that was probably one of the dumbest things this country has ever done. And of course, I'm not talking about any of the real horrid genocidal type of things that this country has done, but I'm talking about financially, economically. The Afghanistan debacle after 9/11 has been probably one of the worst things. It costs way more money than even Vietnam cost.
We don't even know what it costs. We really don't.
We're still not going to find out. They borrowed a bunch of money. We're going to be paying it back for who knows how long, right?
It's 7 or 8 trillion now, so it's still running.
So what has happened is, especially when you run out of competition, right? Competition keeps you smart, it keeps you streamlined, it keeps you efficient, right? When the U.S. was competing against the USSR, even though we always dwarfed their power, it was always exaggerated what the USSR was actually capable of. Although they do genuinely, I think, have more nukes. They had more nukes, and now Russia has more nukes. Okay, but the genuine capability of the USSR was exaggerated. But at the time, the U.S. had someone to compete against, which kept this country advancing scientifically, economically, trying to innovate, and not trying to get, bloated with inefficiencies and that kind of thing. All that changed after the fall of the USSR. The United States said, oh shit, we don't got nobody to really compete against anymore, so we're just going to go around electioneering and regime changing places and on the low key, and we're just going to, our dudes that have been, our military contractor buddies that have been making all this money during the Cold War, building up against the Russian threat, or the the Red Scare or whatever. We'll keep them happy because we don't want them doing anything crazy. We'll keep them happy. We'll keep this, we'll do the war on terror thing, and we'll do regime change every few years or whatever.
And we could have just went to space.
Yeah, and so what happened was the United States became inefficient. It became bloated. It lost its edge, and China clawed its way up. And I can say right now, with the flipping of Pakistan, back to what's going on in Pakistan, with the flipping of Pakistan into this Chinese sphere of influence, and with Russia solidly in there, Iran solidly in there, of course North Korea is a whole other story, but it's related. China has been flipping a bunch of influential countries. And then, of course, we don't want to forget about the BRICS nations, which is Brazil, India, South Africa. What's the other one? I'm forgetting one.
BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
There you go.
Why South Africa is because, unbeknownst to most people, they're still a nuclear player. So supposedly after apartheid ended, they dismantled their 6 nuclear missiles. And that's true, but they just bought a couple hundred more on the open market.
And then there's also this thing right now called the Shanghai Bloc, which is more of a, it's an economic and military alliance between Russia and China as the 2 main players. And of course, China has the economy, China has the manpower, Russia has the technology, and so they make a perfect, and of course Russia has the nuclear weapons.
And more oil than the whole world. But it's
and a bunch of oil.
Frozen.
So Russia makes a perfect natural ally, and it's right up. They share a huge border as well. China has went and built basically a new Silk Road. I know we've talked about this a few times, but Pakistan's a big part of it. It's probably going to be making a stop in Syria. China's already in Syria helping rebuild. China's already in Afghanistan. I mean, these are historical. Looking back, like at the old Kaganites and the Mongolians and the old Chinese dynasties and stuff. All of this stuff is historical, dude. Pakistan at one point was under the sphere of influence of China like 3,000 years ago and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then again with the Mongols even controlling the whole area. China has basically outcompeted the United States. While the United States wasn't competing against anyone, China was competing against us. That's basically what I see happen. The United States was walking around like this big drunken buffoon thinking it can go and do whatever it wanted, and it could. After the fall of the USSR, the US could do whatever the fuck it wanted. The US installed the president in Russia. The US did a bunch of regime change. The US did a bunch of, arming of regimes, backing dictatorships, yellow revolutions and all the good stuff that they did. They went around thinking, oh yeah, no one can even touch us. We're pretty much permanently, the top dogs, and no one's going to do anything. And then China has been this whole time looking up and saying, you know what, we're coming for you. And they've been working really hard. And I'm a huge critic of China because they're extremely authoritarian. In fact, there's news out today that we also have on the anti-media about how they're bringing that social credit system that we talked about a long time ago. It's coming online right now. It's being built into one of their most popular apps in the country. It's a financial app. I think it's called Alipay. Alipay. It's used by
Alibaba.
It's a subsidiary.
Oh God.
Of Alibaba. It's called Alipay. It's used by 300 million people in China, which is the size of the population of the United States, and it's growing like rapidly. It's basically anyone with a smartphone has to use this thing. Uses it to make purchases and that kind of thing. It's kind of like a combination of Amazon and PayPal and Facebook kind of all combined into one thing.
When you guys talk about China, I never in my wildest dream, being a boy from Acapulco, ever thought that I would be as an activist for human rights. I would never thought that I would ever be banned from a country, and I'm banned from China. I cannot travel.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's crazy, and you're probably better off not going there, dude, because they make people disappear.
Because I will say one thing: a friend of the Dalai Lama is not a friend of China, and I've been very supportive of the Dalai Lama. So.
Yeah. So look, I'm not a fan of China. China's a fucking horrible authoritarian country. It killed so many of its own people already. Mm-hmm. It has a police state over there. It has massive censorship.
And it's seriously like if I know people are going to have a hard time grasping this, but if we stop sending them food, they'll have a famine and they'll revolt and they'll have a civil war. So, I mean, everything's tied in together. They depend on us for food. We're the only country in the world that can grow the rice and grain they need in that kind of mass amount. So, I mean, it's just everything's tied together, man. It's the scariest thing is when the dollar actually does die and you don't have Bitcoin or silver coins.
Wow.
What's going to happen to you and your family when the dollar gets cut in half at best? At best. Try more like 75% haircut. I mean, because we've been living beyond our means for 50, 60, 70 years because of the Bretton Woods Agreement. And now, like you said, China's thrown the balance off. It used to be a unipolar world. Now it's not. Now they have their own sphere, and now your dollar is worth half as much, basically.
Yeah, and so what China's doing is they're doing a more...
That's a good point.
How would I describe this? What China's doing right now this is probably going to change in the future, but what they're doing right now is just offering countries better deals. That's basically what they're doing. China is offering better deals to countries, more favorable conditions for countries to say, you know what, we're going to fall into your sphere of influence instead of the United States. That's what they're doing. They're creating economic partnerships that are so powerful that it helps them sway whole countries into their political sphere of influence. And so now we're talking about Pakistan. We're talking about much of the Middle East. I can see Iraq falling in that direction in the coming couple of years. Iran, all the BRICS nations, Brazil is a part of it. China, Mexico is talking about making more and more trade agreements with China because they're not happy about the way Donald Trump has been, uncertain on trade agreements and talking all this smack, talking about tariffs and all this other shit. Mexico's like, all right, well, we're going to work with China. And so a bunch of countries are like getting sick and tired of the United States bossing them around and sending armies when they don't listen and all that kind of shit. And they're saying, well, China's never sent armies. China don't invade people. China don't overthrow governments. China just sends business. China sends investment. They build railroads and they buy our stuff and they sell us cheap goods. And so maybe we're just going to work with China. And so China is basically, look, the United States improved on what the British were doing with the privateering and privatized empire. The United States improved on it a little more. I don't say improve in a good way. I mean, in the worst way possible. They made empire more efficient and less apparent. Because, right, like I said, if you go ask the average American dude out there if the U.S. has an empire, I guarantee you 9 out of 10, if not more, are going to say, what empire are you talking about? The United States is not an empire. We're spreading freedom and we're helping people around the world by bombing them or whatever. And it's like, oh, okay.
Well, it definitely is an empire because I've been telling people, I ask people questions all the time about, I said, look, we have 900 bases around the world. You name me one country that has a base here in the United States and they say, we don't know.
Yes.
Zero. That's the
and
answer.
So China now has built its first foreign military base. It's in Africa, and it's actually only a few miles from a U.S. base in the same country. I'm forgetting which country it is.
How do you know that?
Gabon, is it Gabon? I don't know, but that's like the next battlefield, though.
It's a resource-rich country, of course. Yeah. And now plans leaked out. Chinese military officials leaked plans about building a military base in Pakistan already. So we're talking about a quick flip here, dude, where country flipped from U.S. sphere to Chinese sphere, and China's already talking about building military bases. I mean, we're seeing a shift here, dude. And I know we've been talking about this a lot, and I hate to talk about it again, but I can't stress how big this is.
It's the Asian
look, all of our parents, anyone that has people who grew up in the United States, been here for generations, or even people that just grew up here, you lived under a time where, at least recently, the U.S. was just like the big empire, and it was the big kid on the block. No one could do anything to it. We're now witnessing a true shift where another country is going to be the most powerful, and it's quickly getting to that point. And it's going to have massive, massive repercussions on the economy and just the American way of life and the standard of living and all that stuff.
India's the power.
We can't live high on the hog when we're importing literally everything we need for energy. So, if we don't have a revolution on many different fronts in the U.S. It's going to split into 2 or 3 super little mini states here, and they'll be competitive against each other, and they'll be along probably geographical lines. I could see East and West Coast becoming their own thing, and then the center of the country, but of course the South's different than the North. Maybe
South, North,
4
Midwest,
countries,
and West. Yeah.
I mean, that's the way it looks anyway.
Texas is its own.
You know,
country.
Davey, you were talking about Bitcoin and how the dollar gets affected. Right now, I'm keeping track of what's going to happen in Ecuador because Evo Morales says,
Oh yeah,
I don't want to play with the dollar no more.
Yeah.
And it reminds
Julian's a citizen now.
Oh, you know that,
See
right?
that?
Yeah, yeah. And you know what that reminds me when you said Bitcoin stuff? I said, if what's going to happen to, Bolivia, if he doesn't want to play with the dollar no more, because it reminds me of what happened to Gaddafi when he said, I'm going to create my own currency.
Yeah.
Boom. All of a sudden, living in chaos.
Now, it was different back then when it was just Libya, right? It was just one country, and it also happened with Iraq. Now, you got dozens of countries around the world saying, you know what, maybe we're not going to deal with the dollar. Even Saudi Arabia is now, of course, they're not saying anything yet, but it's been mentioned that Saudi Arabia could deal in the yuan for oil. Okay. And so there's a bunch of countries now in Central America, South America, and Asia. The Philippines, I'm sure, is going to be coming next. And India, I think, is the last linchpin for the West. You know, India, of course, is a former British colony, and I think still, you were saying, it's kind of like still influenced.
India?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
India and England.
Yeah, they're definitely influenced.
If India were to flip to China, that's the whole world. That's basically the whole world.
I don't think they will.
But if they did, that's it. That's literally half the world's population. Half the world's population, and they're all in the same area. And if they got onto one alliance, the rest of the world can kick rocks because there's nothing anyone could do about it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where, in the coming years, and I don't think it's going to happen for maybe 10 or 15 years. Hopefully we have that long. Maybe it'll be longer. But in that time, if India shifts alliances and falls into the Chinese bloc, I guess you would call it, the Eastern Bloc, the new alliance that's forming out there, that's the end of days for the dollar. That's the end of days for Western finance. That's the end of days for British banking. That's everything. All that stuff gets taken down several notches, and it's like cut the legs off them, put them down, lay them down, they're done. You know, that's the U.S. After that, the U.S. economy cools off. It goes into a long depression, and you know, at that point, they're going to have to try to lock the taxpayers in because everyone's going to be trying to get the hell out in the, you know, like when there's a depression. People are trying to get the hell out, look for better work. I mean, this is the same exact thing that's happening. Why people are coming to the United States right now from other countries because they're having a hard time making a living and it's violent and all that shit. We're going to be in their shoes in the next 20 years, dude. And so we got, like, first of all, you should show compassion to people who are running from these kind of situations right now. Refugees, you know, like I said, immigrant, you know, people that are looking, both trying to be safer and trying to find a better way of life. First of all, we should be compassionate about them just because we should be compassionate human beings. But also because we're going to be in their shoes in about 20 years too. When all this stuff, when this shift happens, the U.S. is going to be in a long-term depression and people are going to be trying to get the hell out. And I'll tell you what, the last thing the government wants, where they have all these debts and they have all this money and they need all this revenue to keep the government going, the last thing they want is to be losing taxpayers. They need more taxpayers. Yeah. They're going to open up a one-way street where anyone can come to the U.S. that wants to come in. No one can get out, right? And that's the thing, dude. This surveillance state that's being built up, this border state, this police state that's being built, in 20 years it's going to be turned back against the average American person who is right now financing what is going to be their own enslavement.
Well, their kids are completely bought into it. I mean, if you look at the typical person now that's under 18 years old, I mean, Jesus, have they not had violence instilled in them from day one? And do they not get excited by it? And is it not normalized to see people in full combat gear at, like, concerts now? Exactly. They don't care. Yeah. So it's up to us. Unfortunately, it is. It's up to us.
The millennials got to do it, dude.
It's the only people that will, because the boomers are going to die. They really are. They're going to die before it gets bad enough for them to want to do anything. So it's going to be up to us to preventively cut it off. Or if we don't, then it's just going to be Brave New World over here. Brave New World, dude. They'll just I see it already, man. They're just medicating the population into a trance, like with opiates, with antidepressants. Making weed legal is part of that too, because a lot of people abuse it and they can't handle it. So
yeah, it's going to be like a combination of 1984 and Brave New World, and then Idiocracy.
And you know
the documentary.
And if that doesn't work, they have a bullet for you. So I mean, you're right, dude. And here's the thing: the military is going to take over soon, so it's really going to be up to the people what comes after that. If the military takes over and we're complacent and let them run things, that 20 years you just said will be really, really accelerated. More like 10. Maybe the end of Trump's second term they'll ram it in.
Yeah, and you know? It's hard to place a date on this stuff, on when it's going to happen and all that stuff. People have been predicting. I mean, fools have been saying, "Oh, the dollar is going to collapse for fucking decades and probably even longer," right? But the difference is now, and the evidence is very apparent. I mean, we just went over it. The people are turning away from the dollar. China's replacing our economic empire with their own improved version of it. And the U.S. government has squandered away basically all of the wealth of this country, and all the labor that went into building it is all kind of squandered away in all these wars, trillions of dollars in debt for all this crazy, insane, conflicts we got going all over the world. You know, it's something that could have been prevented, but unfortunately it wasn't. So we have to just prepare for it. There's no telling exactly when it hits. Like I say, I think it's going to be 15, 20 years. It could start tomorrow. We don't know. But I'll tell you what, the developments with China are happening so fast that anyone telling you any different with China is not informed, because China is making moves like crazy, and everywhere the U.S. slips, China picks up the pieces. And we're going to talk about this on Monday's show, because we're going to have a guy from geopoliticsalert.com come in and talk about. He's an expert on China and Xi Jinping, which is the Chinese president and stuff. He's an expert on a lot of stuff. But he made a point the other day about all this shit about the Russians, getting, puppeteering Donald Trump is ironic, because it seems like everything Trump is doing isn't actually helping the Russians. It's actually helping the Chinese. Directly, I mean. Of course, if the Chinese are growing and Russia falls into their alliance, of course it's helping them too. But China is everywhere Trump slips, China is falling right into place, dude. Donald Trump goes on Twitter and says something about Pakistan. A few days later, it's like, oh, we're dumping the dollar. We're going to deal with China now. It's like, oh, okay. Trump isn't able to finish, Obama and Trump couldn't finish the job in Syria. They couldn't put a stop to the Russian, backing. Guess who's rebuilding Syria? China. We're everywhere, dude. Everywhere this stuff is happening, man. And the U.S. is losing ground. We've lost our morale. That's part of it. The military has no morale. These guys are killing themselves faster than they're getting killed out on the battlefield by a huge margin. And there's just no momentum left. The United States has the technological edge.
That's the scary
part. But it doesn't have
right?
it doesn't have the momentum to do anything.
It doesn't have the morality either anymore.
Yeah.
Like, we used to fight people to actually to accomplish something, a goal, an objective, and now we just do it to take their stuff. So
yeah.
And who's going to stop us? We don't need soldiers much longer. Yeah. Maybe not even anymore. So.
And at the same time, when we take their stuff, look, the empires back in the day, even the British, they would get the taxpayer money. They'd go conquer countries, and they'd share some of the plunder with the public. What's going on now is they're socializing the wars, and they're privatizing all the resources that are plundered. And so they go and knock out governments in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya. Instead of the government sharing that stuff with us, it's privatized. So we're just going to plunder. Thank you all again. See you again on Monday. Got it.
Go and let it blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo. This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo.